Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will have to retire from the Lakers today. I just want to make clear, first of all, that I do not have the AIDS disease, because I know a lot of you want to know that, but the HIV virus. My wife is fine. She's negative, so no problem with her. I plan on going on living for a long time.
And he has. Remember that moment like it was yesterday. Sunday marks 30 years since basketball legend, MVP, Olympic gold medalist, and one of the greatest players and businessmen of all time, Irvin Magic Johnson. He sent shockwaves around the world with that announcement. His HIV positive status raising awareness, though, about the importance of safer sex and heightening conversation in the black community. That announcement was named ESPN's 7th most memorable moment.
Former senior columnist for Sports Illustrated, Joe Posnanski, joins us now to talk about all of this. Good morning to you, Joe. It's hard to believe that it has been 3 decades, right? We all remember where we were when Magic stepped before the mic and stunned the world. I can't even remember if there were leaks ahead of the announcement, even minutes before. What do you remember about that day working as a sports writer and Magic Johnson, the game's biggest star?
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, I think for people of our generation, and in a lot of ways, it's as memorable as anything that's happened. You know, I mean, I've thought about that as sort of, you know, the generation before us. Everybody remembers where they were when Kennedy was shot, and I think everybody of our generation knows precisely where they were when they heard about Magic Johnson. For me, my first job. I was working in Augusta, Georgia, as a sports writer, a sports columnist there, and I don't recall there being any warning whatsoever. I was literally in the newsroom when suddenly I saw a bunch of people gathering around the television, and it was like, what's going on? And being a sports writer, I knew nothing, and there was Magic Johnson making the announcement, and you know, it's impossible to explain to people just how big a deal he was then. I mean, he's obviously still such a big deal, but then he was as iconic as anybody in the entire country. It was really jolting, and it was very early on in what we were trying to figure out what HIV was, and it was really, really a titanic moment.
A huge moment. He was my favorite player at the time, still one of my favorite players of all time. I remember, once again, as I mentioned in the last hour, I actually cried as a grown man listening to that announcement. And remember, this was a long time before social media. So tell me about that and that announcement. Even though we had heard about AIDS and HIV, Rock Hudson back in, I believe, 1984, so for 5 or 6 years before that, we had been hearing about this disease. But what kind of impact do you think it did for awareness for people? Because there was still a lot of stigmas around the disease, that it was a disease for people in the gay community.
Yeah, I think it was it's as big as anything as far as awareness goes. And you're 100% right. I think we were all still, you know, not all of us, but many of us still trying to figure out what this was. I think it was confusing for a great number of people, the difference between being HIV positive and having AIDS, and what that meant. And I think it was, you know, it's funny you should say that. I sometimes think about how did we find out stuff before social media, right? Like how did anything ever get out there? But we did, and we all gathered around. That was the thing. It was everybody finding out pretty much at the same time, you know, through television, through his announcement. I mean, he really spoke directly into America's collective hearts. And I think everybody at that point, you know, throughout the country needed to know more about it, wanted to know more about it. I definitely think from an awareness standpoint, it was enormous. And then to watch him, you know, for the next few years, to see him come back and play in the Olympics, to see him come back and play in general, I think it was an enormous, you know, part of people trying to understand what this terrible disease was.
He taught us so much about HIV and AIDS. 62 years old now, he has maintained such a healthy, productive, successful life. The virus undetectable, he says, in his body. But it's also that smile that never left him, the stature physically. But what did he teach us, remind us about the NBA, where the league was, and whether they were ready for this? Because I remember Karl Malone was one of the outspoken players at the time Magic attempted that comeback. Remind us.
Yeah, I mean, I think the league was in a place where most of America was, which was people were not ready for this announcement. We're not ready to deal with this situation. And you'll remember Karl Malone was one of the more outspoken ones, but there were many who were outspoken, did not want to play on the same court, were worried that he would get cut and there'd be some bleeding, and there were rules changes throughout sports that came from this, where people said if you were bleeding you had to get out of the game or you had to dry it up, and then those rules still are lasting to this day. I don't think anybody was ready for it, and I don't think I think I remember feeling a tear in my eye too when it happened, and I think that's because we thought, well, you don't survive this, right? Like that. Look, what we knew about HIV and what we knew about AIDS was it's a death sentence, and of course, so much has been done in that realm. But to see him so positive, and you're right, that smile. I mean, he was named Magic. I mean, everything about him was so so incredible, and to see him and the way he dealt with this and the way he went public with it. It opened so many eyes. But you're right, there was, at that moment, I don't think anybody was ready for this.
Hey, Joe, we got about a minute left. I want to hit you on this before we go, because look, we've changed the perception of what HIV is and being able to live over the years. But one of the things that hasn't changed is the perception of racism, which continues to go on, misogyny. So I want to get your thoughts real quick on the Robert Sarver situation, the allegations made against him, the Phoenix Suns owner.
Well, if people have seen the story, they'll realize it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And it's one of those stories, of course, there are denials throughout the story. He insists he's always been, great. And there are a couple of defenders. But, I mean, it's person after person after person talking about blatant racism, blatant misogyny, that has been a very toxic place there in Phoenix to work. And you're right, it's a reminder. The NBA is so proud of how progressive it is, and in so many ways it is shown to be that progressive league. And then something like this happens, and you remind how much farther we have to go. I mean, it's really, really bad, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it shakes out. But I don't think you recover from something like this,
Yeah. We'll see what the league does. Here we are again, right? Here we are again with another NBA owner. Joe, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for marking this moment in history with us. Thanks for starting your day with us.